Fame gave me everything except peace. The louder the laughter, the quieter my own soul became. This could have been whispered by Robin Williams himself, a man adored by millions, yet trapped in silence behind his smile. The tragedy of his story was never the laughter, but the loneliness beneath it.
It was August 11th, 2014. The world awoke to a headline never expected. Robin Williams, the man who made millions laugh, was gone at 63. News outlets repeated the words with disbelief. Fans scrolled through their phones, stunned. How could the brightest light of comedy suddenly be extinguished? For decades, Robin had been the soul of humor, a figure who turned chaos into laughter. From alien antics in Mork and Mindy to the tender wisdom of Good Will Hunting, he seemed untouchable, an endless fountain of energy, jokes, and compassion. On screen, he was kinetic. Off screen, he was generous, humble, even shy. So when the world learned of his sudden death, the shock wasn't just about losing an actor. It was about losing a presence, someone who felt like family, the uncle who cheered you up, the teacher who reminded you of your worth, the voice that reassured you in moments of despair. But as tributes poured in, tweets from presidents, tears from colleagues, candlelight vigils from fans, a different question began to form. Why? The official reports pointed to depression. The narrative was simple, almost too simple. Even the funniest people carry sadness. It fit neatly into the tragic arc of tortured comedians, Richard Pryor, John Belushi, Chris Farley. Yet the truth behind Robin's final years was far more complicated. In the weeks that followed, details surfaced. His friends spoke of changes, hesitation in his speech, fear in his eyes, a mind once razor-sharp, now clouded with uncertainty. His wife revealed that behind closed doors, Robin was battling something he didn't understand, a rare neurological condition that would not be diagnosed until after his death. The man who once improvised entire worlds in a single breath was now struggling to remember lines, to hold thoughts steady, to trust his own body. The very tools of his brilliance, his mind, his spontaneity, his timing, were slipping away. And here lies the paradox that gripped the world. The clown who carried everyone else's sadness could no longer carry his own. In this documentary, we will peel back the layers of Robin's extraordinary life. We'll explore his lonely childhood, where humor became his survival tool. We'll follow his meteoric rise, the addiction battles that nearly broke him, and the soaring highs of an Oscar win. We'll step into the darkness of his final years, where an invisible illness dismantled the man behind the smile. Along the way, we'll uncover rare moments, like the anonymous hospital visits, where Robin dressed as a doctor just to make sick children laugh, or the time he quietly paid tuition for a fellow actor so they could pursue their dream. These hidden acts of kindness revealed a deeper truth. Robin's gift wasn't just comedy, it was empathy. But empathy has a cost. To feel so deeply, to absorb so much of the world's pain, leaves scars unseen. Robin Williams lived to bring joy, but the joy came with shadows, and when the laughter stopped, those shadows closed in. But the truth behind it is much darker.
Before the world knew Robin Williams as a whirlwind of characters, he was a quiet, lonely boy searching for connection. Robin "the-Clorin" Williams was born on July 21, 1951, in Chicago, Illinois. His father, Robert Fitzgerald Williams, was a senior executive at Ford Motor Company. His mother, Lori McLaurin, was a former model from New Orleans with a sharp wit and elegance that enchanted anyone in the room. On paper, Robin had every advantage: a wealthy family, a spacious home, private schools. But behind the manicured lawns and luxury, the boy was often alone. His father worked long hours. His mother moved in social circles that kept her away. The Williams household was quiet, almost sterile. Robin later admitted that his closest companions were the hundreds of toy soldiers he played with in his attic. There he created elaborate battles, gave voices to every figurine, and built entire universes out of plastic and imagination. It was the first stage he would ever know. Despite the privilege, Robin's childhood was marked by isolation. He was shy, small, and often withdrawn. At school, he wasn't the class clown. He was the boy sitting in the back, drawing, watching others. Teachers remembered him as thoughtful but introverted, rarely speaking unless prompted. The seeds of his future brilliance, his ability to observe, to mimic, to transform, were already taking root. The first spark of performance came not from an audience, but from his mother. Lori had a quick, playful sense of humor, and Robin found that if he could make her laugh, the distance between them seemed to vanish. Humor became his bridge, his currency of love. Years later, he would say that the sound of his mother's laughter was the most important applause he ever received. But laughter was also a shield. In interviews, Robin confessed that comedy became his way of hiding pain. If people were laughing, they couldn't see the loneliness. If he was performing, he didn't have to explain himself. In the late 1950s, the Williams family moved to a sprawling 40-room mansion in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. To any outsider, it was a palace. To young Robin, it was an echo chamber of solitude. He spent hours alone in those cavernous halls, his imagination the only thing filling the silence. He created characters to talk to, voices that kept him company. This endless rehearsal would one day become his signature improvisation style, an arsenal of personalities he could summon in an instant. Yet behind the creative explosion was a boy struggling with insecurity. Despite his family's wealth, Robin felt out of place. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't the popular kid. He was the observer, the imitator, the one who survived by being invisible until the moment he could make others laugh. The turning point came in high school when he discovered drama classes. For the first time, his imagination had a stage. His teachers recognized the raw energy, the uncanny ability to slip in and out of voices, the way he could hold an entire room's attention without a script. He wasn't just acting, he was channeling something deeper, something uncontainable.
Still, even as the applause grew, so did the shadows. Robin later admitted that his early years instilled a lifelong fear of abandonment. He craved connection, but often doubted whether he truly belonged. This paradox, desperate to be seen, terrified of rejection, would fuel both his genius and his torment. By the time he graduated, Robin had set his sights on performance. He studied political science briefly at Claremont Men's College, but soon realized the classroom could never contain him. He shifted to acting, first at College of Marin in California, then at the prestigious Juilliard School in New York. It was there, under the mentorship of John Houseman, that Robin's talent exploded. At Juilliard, Robin met Christopher Reeve, who would become a lifelong friend. The two bonded instantly, one destined to be Superman, the other a comet of comedy. Their friendship offered Robin something rare, a sense of grounding. Years later, when Reeve was paralyzed, Robin would show up in his hospital room, disguised as a doctor, performing a ridiculous routine until his old friend laughed again. That act of love would define who Robin truly was, not just a performer, but a healer. Yet, as his Juilliard instructors quickly realized, Robin's gift was also his challenge. His improvisation was unmatched, his energy uncontainable. He could transform a line into a symphony of voices. But structure, discipline, focus, these were harder for him. Even then, the vivid imagination that dazzled others sometimes overwhelmed him. It was as if Robin had an entire crowd inside his head, and silence was the one thing he feared most. By the early 1970s, Robin left Juilliard without graduating. He didn't need a diploma to prove what was already evident. He was a once-in-a-generation talent. But he also left with the same wounds he had carried since childhood: loneliness, fear of rejection, and a desperate need to connect. Those wounds would drive him forward, giving the world a brilliance it had never seen before. But they would also haunt him, setting the stage for both his meteoric rise and his devastating fall.
In the mid-1970s, San Francisco was alive with counterculture. Comedy clubs, music halls, and experimental stages buzzed with voices eager to push boundaries. Into this scene stepped a young Robin Williams, a former Juilliard student who had traded Shakespeare for stand-up. At first, he was just another face in the crowd, nervously clutching a microphone. But the moment he began, the room shifted. Robin didn't tell jokes in the traditional sense. He unleashed entire worlds. One moment, he was a Scottish bartender, the next, a Russian poet, the next, an alien observing Earth with confused delight. His body became elastic, his voice a carousel of characters. Audiences didn't just laugh, they leaned in, mesmerized, unsure what would come next. Within months, Robin was the talk of the Bay Area comedy circuit. Club owners marveled at his stamina, the way he could improvise for hours without repeating a line. Fellow comedians both admired and feared him. How do you follow an act that feels like a tidal wave? But the genius came at a cost. Offstage, Robin was shy, almost painfully so. The transformation was jarring, explosive on stage, withdrawn in private. It was as if the characters he created were more comfortable than Robin himself. He admitted later that stand-up was his shield, the one place where his restless energy found a home. The breakthrough came when television producers caught wind of his act. In 1978, Robin was cast in Mork Mindy, a spin-off born from a bizarre cameo on Happy Days. The role of Mork, a manic alien from the planet Orc, seemed tailor-made for him. He didn't just play Mork, he was Mork. The improvisations, the wild voices, the physical gags, all flowed naturally from Robin's chaotic brilliance. Almost overnight, he became a household name. Mork and Mindy drew millions of viewers, and Robin's rainbow suspenders and catchphrase "Nu Nanu" became pop culture staples. Children adored him, adults marveled at him, and Hollywood took notice. Yet fame arrived with a dangerous intensity. Robin went from performing in intimate clubs to being recognized on every street corner. The pressure to always be on, to deliver laughter at any moment, weighed heavily. And in the late 1970s, Hollywood's party culture offered an easy escape. Cocaine, alcohol, endless nights, Robin dove in, chasing energy, connection, and perhaps relief from the silence that haunted him. Friends later recalled how his dressing room became a revolving door of admirers, hangers-on, and partygoers. He seemed unstoppable, fueled by a manic brilliance. But those close to him began to see the cracks. Behind the hyperactive comedy was exhaustion. Behind the laughter was loneliness. The tragedy of John Belushi in 1982 became a wake-up call. Belushi, one of Robin's friends and fellow comedic icons, died of a drug overdose at the age of 33. Robin had been with him just hours before. The shock was devastating.
He realized how close he was to following the same path. That night became a turning point, pushing him toward sobriety. For a while. Professionally, however, his star continued to rise. Robin transitioned from TV to film, taking roles in Popeye in 1980 and stand-up specials that showcased his unrelenting energy. Not every project landed, but audiences never forgot him. He was too unique, too electric. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him yet, but it knew he couldn't be ignored.
One of his first stand-up specials for HBO in 1978 stunned critics. Watching Robin was like watching someone channel multiple dimensions at once. His improvisations felt almost supernatural, as though he wasn't inventing jokes, but receiving them from some invisible current. "He doesn't write comedy," one critic wrote. "He is comedy." But Robin himself wasn't so sure. The applause was addictive, yes, but it was also fleeting. When the lights dimmed and the audience went home, silence returned. The characters disappeared, and Robin, the shy boy from the attic, was left alone again. It was in these years that the paradox of Robin Williams hardened. The more he gave to the world, the emptier he felt inside. The more people laughed, the more he feared what would happen when the laughter stopped. By the mid-1980s, Robin had cemented his place as one of America's most original comedians. He was fast, fearless, and utterly unpredictable. But beneath the meteoric rise, the same forces that had fueled his genius, loneliness, insecurity, a desperate hunger for connection, were also planting seeds of turmoil. He was on the brink of something bigger than he had ever imagined, Hollywood stardom. But with it would come even greater pressures, even sharper highs and lows, and temptations that would test him to his core. The boy who had once found comfort in making his mother laugh was now tasked with making the entire world laugh. And in that enormous responsibility lay the beginnings of a burden he could not carry forever. By the late 1980s, Robin Williams had become more than a comedian. He was a cultural phenomenon. Hollywood, once uncertain how to harness his frenetic genius, now embraced him as a leading man capable of both chaos and depth. The breakthrough came with Good Morning Vietnam, 1987. Cast as Adrian Cronauer, a radio DJ entertaining American troops during the Vietnam War, Robin was given permission to improvise freely. What he delivered was electric. Manic riffs, absurd voices, rapid-fire impressions. But beyond the comedy, there was poignancy. His Cronauer made soldiers laugh even as war raged outside their barracks. The performance earned Robin his first Academy Award nomination and proved he wasn't just a clown, he was a storyteller. 2 years later, Dead Poets Society, 1989, cemented his reputation. As English teacher John Keating, Robin was restrained, measured, tender. The man who once thrived on manic energy now whispered lines that echoed through generations. Carpe diem, seize the day, boys. Students rose on desks, audiences rose in theaters. The film became an anthem for individuality, and Robin's performance revealed a new side, the mentor, the philosopher, the quiet revolutionary. The roles kept coming. Awakenings, 1990, opposite Robert De Niro, showed his dramatic range. The Fisher King, 1991, earned him another Oscar nomination. And in the same year, Disney turned to Robin for something no one else could do: breathe life into a blue, shape-shifting genie. His work in Aladdin 1992 was unlike anything the studio had seen. Recording sessions turned into marathon improvisations, with Robin voicing dozens of characters, leaping from Groucho Marx to Arnold Schwarzenegger to a Scottish nanny in seconds. Animators struggled to keep up with his energy. The result was iconic. Children adored the genie's warmth, adults caught the sly references. Robin had transformed an animated sidekick into the heart of the film.
But success wasn't measured in just box office numbers. Off-screen, his influence reached across generations. Soldiers wrote letters thanking him for bringing joy during deployments. Teachers used Dead Poets Society to inspire students. Parents found comfort in the lessons of Mrs. Doubtfire, 1993, where Robin played a father willing to disguise himself as a British nanny just to stay close to his children. The film was a comedy, yes, but also a bittersweet reflection of divorce, love, and family, issues Robin himself wrestled with privately. Yet behind the accolades, the strain was mounting. Fame demanded Robin to be ever present, ever brilliant. He described the pressure as a constant expectation. People wanted Mork, the genie, the clown, 24 hours a day. Strangers expected jokes at the grocery store. Waiters expected impressions at dinner. And Robin, too generous to refuse, often obliged. But the act was exhausting. The more the world celebrated his energy, the less space he had for silence. At home, he battled insecurities, addictions resurfaced, and marriages fractured. His second wife, Marcia, later admitted that living with Robin was like living with 1,000 people at once. He could be tender and loving, then restless and distant, his moods swinging with the same velocity as his performances.
Friends also noticed his relentless need for connection. Robin feared being alone, feared the quiet where no laughter existed. Comedy had always been his way to bridge the gap, but in private moments, the gap widened. Still, Robin gave relentlessly to others. He performed countless USO tours, traveling to war zones to entertain American troops. Unlike many celebrities, he didn't make grand announcements. He showed up quietly, without cameras, spending hours shaking hands, making jokes, listening. Soldiers later said his visits were life-saving, a reminder of humanity in places where death hovered daily. And then there were his acts of private generosity. Few knew that Robin paid for Christopher Reeve's medical bills after his accident, or that he funded scholarships anonymously. He didn't want the spotlight on his charity. He wanted the spotlight on those who needed help. By the mid-1990s, Robin was at the top of the world. An Oscar win for Good Will Hunting, 1997, confirmed what audiences had long known. He wasn't just a comedian. He was one of the finest actors of his generation. In that role, as a grieving therapist guiding Matt Damon's character toward healing, Robin's own pain seeped through. The line, "It's not your fault," delivered with such tenderness, resonated because it felt real. It wasn't just a script, it was Robin speaking to himself and to millions of others who carried unseen burdens. But success could not silence the demons. The very traits that made Robin extraordinary, his boundless empathy, his manic brilliance, his need to connect, also left him vulnerable. At the height of fame, with trophies on his shelf and adoration worldwide, Robin was still wrestling with the same shadows that had haunted him since childhood. And soon, those shadows would grow darker. For much of the world, Robin Williams seemed invincible. A man who could leap from slapstick to Shakespeare, who never ran out of characters, who never stopped giving. But behind the curtain, Robin was fighting wars the audience could not see. The first battle was with addiction. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, when Hollywood's party culture was at its peak, Robin was swept into the tide. Cocaine, alcohol, sleepless nights, it was as much a part of the scene as auditions and premieres. Robin once admitted, "Cocaine is God's way of telling you you have too much money." It was a joke, but one rooted in truth. The death of John Belushi in 1982 was a brutal turning point. Belushi, a close friend, died of a drug overdose at just 33. Robin had been with him hours before. The loss shattered him. Confronted with his own mortality, Robin sobered up, for a time.
The fear of following Belushi into an early grave pushed him into recovery. But sobriety was not a straight road. Temptation lingered, and the pressures of fame often reopened the door. Even as he conquered addictions publicly, he faced another enemy: depression. The irony was cruel. The man who brought joy to millions was plagued by despair. In interviews, he admitted to feeling an emptiness no audience could fill. After the laughter faded, he often found himself alone with thoughts too heavy to silence. Journalists sometimes sensed the shadow. In a 2006 interview with The Guardian, Robin confessed, "You can be in the same room with other people and still feel totally alone. It's the worst." It wasn't an act of self-pity, it was a glimpse into the private pain he carried daily. Marriages, too, suffered under the weight of his struggles. His first marriage to Valerie Velarde ended in 1988, strained by infidelity and the chaos of fame. His second marriage to Marcia Garces brought stability for a while, but even that foundation cracked as Robin's inner battles deepened. By the time of their divorce in 2010, Robin had endured 2 decades of trying and failing to balance the roles of husband, father, celebrity, and survivor of his own demons. Professionally, Robin's career seemed unstoppable, yet even there, shadows crept in. Not every film succeeded, and critics were often harsh when his projects stumbled. Films like Bicentennial Man or Patch Adams, though beloved by some, were dismissed by others as sentimental missteps. The criticisms cut deep. For a man whose self-worth was tied to bringing joy, rejection felt personal. By the early 2000s, Robin's old addictions resurfaced. He relapsed into drinking, quietly at first, then publicly. In 2006, he checked himself into rehab. He joked about it later on stage, but beneath the humor was shame. Friends described how he masked his pain with self-deprecating jokes, but behind closed doors, he was fragile, fearful, and increasingly tired.
And then came the silence. Unlike earlier in his career, when stages and fans seemed to recharge him, Robin began withdrawing. His energy, once volcanic, dimmed. He still performed, stand-up specials, films, even a Broadway run in Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo, but colleagues noticed a difference. His improvisation slowed, his timing faltered. Something deeper than depression seemed to be taking hold. Tabloids, unaware of the truth, speculated cruelly. Was he washed up? Had fame burned him out? The public saw only a dimming star. What they couldn't see was that Robin was grappling with the early symptoms of an undiagnosed disease, Lewy body dementia, a neurological condition that disrupts memory, movement, and behavior. At the time, Robin didn't know the name of his enemy. He only knew that his mind, once his greatest ally, was betraying him. Friends and colleagues like Billy Crystal later described how Robin seemed increasingly anxious in his final years. He worried about forgetting lines. He feared losing control in public. The man whose mind once raced ahead of everyone else was now stumbling to keep up with himself. Still, Robin pushed forward. He returned to television in 2013 with The Crazy Ones, a sitcom that paired him with Sarah Michelle Gellar. It was meant to be a comeback, a new chapter. But the show was canceled after 1 season, and the failure weighed heavily. For Robin, whose identity was built on making people laugh, the idea that he was losing his magic was unbearable. The truth was darker still. Robin wasn't losing his gift. He was losing his brain to a disease he didn't yet understand. The depression, the anxiety, the memory lapses were symptoms of something far more insidious. But in those final years, the world saw only the cracks. And Robin, ever the performer, tried to hide them behind the same smile that had carried him since childhood. The stage lights were still on, but behind them, Robin Williams was fading.
By 2013, The cracks in Robin Williams' life were no longer just personal. They were physical, neurological, unavoidable. He had begun to experience symptoms that terrified him: anxiety attacks, tremors, sleepless nights, memory lapses. He who once juggled 10 characters in a single breath now stumbled to remember lines. He who thrived on improvisation now second-guessed himself mid-sentence. Doctors initially diagnosed him with Parkinson's disease. The news devastated him. Parkinson's meant a slow decline, a body betraying its master. For a man whose identity was tied to quickness, energy, and control, the thought was unbearable. Still, Robin tried to push on. He sought treatment, leaned on his wife Susan, and tried to convince himself that he could fight it. But there was something else lurking beneath the diagnosis, something even doctors hadn't yet recognized. After his death, it would be revealed that Robin was suffering from Lewy body dementia, an aggressive neurological disease that affects cognition, mood, movement, and perception. The condition is often misdiagnosed, its symptoms resembling Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but carrying the cruelty of both. Robin didn't know the name of his enemy. All he knew was that his mind, the very instrument of his genius, was slipping. He grew paranoid. He felt trapped in his own body. He confided in friends that he was terrified of losing himself, of becoming a burden. His last major project, the television show The Crazy Ones in 2013, was supposed to be a fresh start. But the cancellation after one season hit him harder than most realized. Privately, he interpreted it as proof that he was no longer wanted, no longer capable. In truth, audiences still adored him, but Robin's illness distorted his perception. Successes felt hollow, failures felt catastrophic. By the summer of 2014, Robin's condition had worsened. His wife Susan later described their final months as a nightmare they couldn't name. He was losing weight, losing sleep, losing hope. The man who once lit up rooms now wandered them in fear. On August 11, 2014, the news broke: Robin Williams was gone at the age of 63. The world stopped. Fans couldn't comprehend it. Social media filled with shock, grief, and disbelief. "Jeannie, you're free," wrote one fan, a line that spread globally as both tribute and heartbreak. The official reports pointed to suicide. For many, it was a tragic confirmation of the old cliché: comedians hide pain behind laughter. But those closest to him knew the truth was far more complicated. Robin wasn't just battling depression. He was trapped in a body and mind ravaged by Lewy body dementia. The disease had stolen his clarity, his resilience, his sense of self. The aftermath was staggering. President Barack Obama released a statement. He arrived in our lives as an alien, but he ended up touching every element of the human spirit. He made us laugh. He made us cry. He gave his immeasurable talent freely and generously to those who needed it most. Colleagues from Steve Martin to Billy Crystal wept publicly. Audiences around the world held vigils, leaving flowers at his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, writing messages on sidewalks, gathering in parks to watch his films projected under the night sky. It wasn't just the loss of an actor. It was the loss of a friend they'd never met, a companion who had guided them through childhood, heartbreak, and loneliness. In the days that followed, his wife Susan revealed the full story. Robin hadn't simply been depressed. He had been fighting a neurological disease that hijacked his brain. It was not depression that killed Robin. It was Lewy body dementia. Depression was one of 50 symptoms, and it was one of the lesser ones. Her words reframed the tragedy, shifting the narrative from cliché to truth. But the truth didn't make the loss easier. Robin Williams was gone. The man who could turn silence into laughter, who could improvise galaxies of characters, who gave joy to strangers in hospital rooms, would never step on stage again. His death left a wound that cut across generations. For those who grew up with Aladdin, The genie's absence was unbearable. For those who found inspiration in Dead Poets Society, it felt like losing a teacher. For those who clung to Good Will Hunting, it was like losing a therapist who had whispered, "It's not your fault," in their darkest hours. Robin Williams' final act was not on screen, but in the way the world mourned him. In his absence, we realized how much we had depended on him, how much of our laughter had been built on his pain. In the days, weeks, and years after Robin Williams' passing, his legacy only grew deeper. What remained wasn't just the body of work, dozens of films, countless stand-up specials, iconic television appearances, but the emotional imprint he left on the world. Generations remembered him in different ways. For children of the 1990s, he was the genie, bursting out of a lamp with 1,000 voices and boundless warmth. For those grappling with divorce or family struggles, he was Mrs. Doubtfire, reminding them that love was worth disguises and sacrifices. For students yearning for inspiration, he was John Keating, whispering "Carpe diem" as they stepped into adulthood. And for anyone carrying hidden pain, he was Sean Maguire in Good Will Hunting, saying gently, "It's not your fault." Robin's characters were never just entertainment, they were lifelines. They offered comfort in loneliness, humor in despair, and hope in hopelessness. This was the paradox of Robin's gift. While he wrestled with his own shadows, he illuminated the path for millions of others. His colleagues spoke of him not only as a performer, but as a giver. Billy Crystal recalled private moments of friendship, the endless phone calls where Robin made sure others were okay, even when he wasn't. Steven Spielberg remembered Robin calling him every day during the filming of Schindler's List, just to tell jokes and lift his spirits as he worked on one of cinema's darkest stories. To those who knew him, Robin wasn't just funny, he was compassionate to the core. Yet compassion carried weight. As Susan Williams later reflected, Robin's empathy was both his greatest strength and his deepest burden. He felt everything too strongly, absorbed too much of the world's sorrow, and in the end, it left scars invisible to most. But his death sparked conversations that had long been silenced. Suddenly, the world was talking openly about mental health, depression, and neurological disease. Organizations used Robin's story to raise awareness of Lewy body dementia, giving voice to families who had struggled in obscurity. His tragedy became a catalyst for understanding, an unintended gift that continues to ripple outward. For fans, the grief slowly transformed into gratitude. Marathons of his films became communal gatherings, not just of mourning, but of celebration. Each rewatch was a reminder that Robin's light, though extinguished too soon, still flickered in the laughter and tears he left behind.
Perhaps the most poignant reflection comes from his children. Zelda Williams, his daughter, once said that the greatest lesson her father gave her wasn't fame or performance, it was kindness. He was always kind. That was the thing he wanted us to be, above all else. And so the boy who once tried to make his mother laugh in order to feel less alone became a man who made the world laugh to make them feel less alone. In that way, Robin's life formed a circle. Loneliness transformed into connection, pain reshaped into empathy. But the circle also carried tragedy. The very tools that gave him to us, the brilliance, the empathy, the restless imagination, were also the tools that exhausted him. Fame gave him everything except peace. Still, the silence he feared in life has been replaced by echoes in death. His words, his performances, his kindness, they continue to reverberate. Students still stand on desks. Families still gather around his films. Soldiers still remember his visits in the desert. And audiences still whisper thank you to a man who gave them laughter when they needed it most.
Robin Williams may be gone, but his legacy remains. A reminder that laughter and pain often walk hand in hand, and that behind every smile, there may be a private struggle we cannot see. In that truth lies the lesson he leaves us with: to be kinder, to look closer, to listen deeper. For sometimes, the loudest laughter hides the quietest cries.
Robin Williams' story is not only about one man. It is about the industry that demands constant laughter, the media that magnifies flaws, and a society that too often forgets the humanity behind the spotlight. We celebrate talent, but rarely ask what it costs. We crave the performance, but overlook the silence between the jokes. Robin's life reminds us that brilliance is fragile, and that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. His tragedy challenges us to look beyond the smile, to recognize the invisible battles others may face. Behind every laugh, there is a story. Behind every performance, a person. And behind the glory, there is always a truth we must not ignore.